The notification sound from my banking app made my stomach drop, just like it had every month for the past 12 years. Another automatic transfer, $3,000 to my parents' joint account. I stared at my phone screen in the cramped Chicago L train, watching my savings account balance shrink once again. 25 years old, and I was still funding my parents' lifestyle like some kind of personal ATM. The train screeched to a halt at the Clark Lake station, and I squeezed through the crowd of commuters rushing to their downtown offices. The October wind whipped through the streets, cutting right through my thrift store coat. I couldn't afford a new one. Not when Mom had just texted me about needing money for her spa weekend with her sister. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dad. "Nikki, honey, the BMW payment is due Thursday. Can you handle it? Your mother and I are planning that wine tasting trip to Napa we mentioned." I stopped walking right there on State Street, causing a businessman behind me to mutter something under his breath as he swerved around me. Napa? They were going to Napa while I was eating ramen noodles for the third night in a row? This had started when I was 13 and got my first job bagging groceries at the local supermarket. Back then, it was just helping with the electric bill during a rough month. Dad had lost his job at the manufacturing plant, and Mom's part-time work at the hair salon wasn't cutting it. They promised it would be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But somehow, temporary became permanent. Dad found work again, but it was beneath him. Mom could have gone full-time, but she needed her flexibility. Meanwhile, I worked through high school, saved every penny from my college fund for family expenses, and even took out student loans I didn't need just to keep money flowing their way. Now I was making decent money as a marketing consultant, working with small businesses around Chicago to build their online presence. I'd turned my teenage knack for social media into a real career, building websites and managing campaigns from my tiny studio apartment in Lincoln Park. But every success I had just meant more expectations from my parents. I climbed the stairs to my apartment building, a converted brownstone that had seen better days. The radiator in my unit barely worked, and I could hear my upstairs neighbor's TV through the thin ceiling, but it was mine. Well, sort of mine. The rent was manageable because I'd sacrificed location and luxury for independence. My phone rang as I fumbled with my keys. Mom's contact photo, her and Dad at some fancy restaurant I'd paid for, lit up the screen. "Hi, Mom. Nikki, perfect timing. I was just looking at this gorgeous dress online for your cousin Sarah's wedding next month. It's only $400, and you know how important it is that we look appropriate for family events." I pushed open my apartment door and immediately tripped over a pile of client folders I'd left on the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. Proposals for a local bakery's grand opening campaign, social media strategies for a vintage clothing boutique, website mock-ups for a family-owned restaurant in Little Italy. "Mom, $400 for a dress seems like a lot. Nikki, honey, you don't understand these things yet. When you're older and have a family of your own, you'll realize how important appearances are. Besides, isn't your little computer business doing well?" My little computer business. That's what she called the work that paid for her BMW, their mortgage, their vacations, their dinners out, and apparently now a $400 dress. "It's doing fine, Mom, but I have my own expenses too." "Of course you do, sweetheart. But you're young and single. You don't have real responsibilities yet." Real responsibilities. I looked around my sparse apartment. The card table I used as a desk, the air mattress I'd been sleeping on for 8 months because I couldn't afford a real bed, the stack of bills on my kitchen counter that I'd been putting off because every spare dollar went to my parents. "I'll think about it, Mom." "Oh, wonderful. I'll go ahead and order it then. You're such a good daughter, Nikki. Your father and I are so lucky to have you." She hung up before I could protest. I stood there in my tiny living room, surrounded by scattered papers and the weight of 12 years of being everyone's financial safety net. My laptop chimed with a new email, a potential client interested in a complete rebranding package, the kind of project that could actually make a difference for my own financial situation. But I knew where that money would end up, just like all the rest. I gathered up the scattered papers and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to that banking notification. $3,000 automatically transferred like clockwork. Money that could have gone toward a real bed, a warmer coat, maybe even a small emergency fund of my own. Instead, it was probably already earmarked for wine tastings in Napa and $400 dresses for family weddings where I'd show up in something from Target, pretending everything was fine, while my parents basked in a lifestyle I made possible but could never afford for myself. The sad part was, I didn't even know how to stop anymore. 3 weeks later, I sat in my parents' dining room in their suburban Naperville home, watching Mom serve dinner on the expensive china set I'd bought them for their anniversary last year. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was eating off plates I'd purchased while sitting on a chair I'd helped finance, in a house whose mortgage I'd been contributing to since I was barely a teenager. The whole extended family was there for Uncle Pete's birthday. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and their kids all gathered around the mahogany table Dad had insisted they needed when he got his promotion 2 years ago. A promotion that somehow came with less money but more prestige, which meant I picked up the financial slack as usual. Nick's been so busy with her little online thing, Mom was saying to Aunt Linda, gesturing with her wine glass. Wine from the Napa trip I'd funded. We keep telling her she needs to think about settling down soon. 25 and still no prospects. I forced a smile and cut into the prime rib that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Business is actually going really well. I just signed 3 new clients this month. That's nice, honey, Dad chimed in from the head of the table. But Linda's daughter Jessica just got engaged to a doctor. Now that's security. Cousin Jessica, who was 2 years younger than me and had never worked a day in her life, beamed from across the table. Her engagement ring caught the light from the chandelier, another one of my contributions to this house. I don't know how you do it, living alone in that tiny apartment, Aunt Linda said, shaking her head. At your age, I was already married to your Uncle Bob and thinking about babies. Different times, I mumbled, taking a large gulp of water. I couldn't afford to drink tonight. I was driving, and Uber would eat into my grocery money for next week. Not that different, Mom laughed. I think our Nikki here is just too picky. Always has been. Remember when she was 16 and we tried to set her up with the Morrison boy? She said she was too busy with work to date. I remembered that. I'd been working 30 hours a week at the grocery store plus babysitting on weekends, desperately trying to keep up with their financial demands while maintaining my grades. Dating hadn't exactly been a priority when I was calculating whether we could afford both the electric bill and Dad's car payment that month. Speaking of work, Uncle Pete said, turning to me with genuine interest. Linda was telling me you help businesses with their websites. My buddy owns a construction company and has been looking for someone to help him get online. Finally, someone who understood that what I did was actual work. Yes, I specialize in digital marketing and web development for small businesses. I'd be happy to talk to him about it. Oh, that's so cute, Mom interrupted with a dismissive wave. She makes little websites for people. But really, it's not a real career, you know? It's more like a hobby that pays. Nothing like what Jessica's fiancé does, saving lives as a surgeon. The room went quiet for a moment. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. A hobby that pays? I'd been supporting their entire lifestyle with this hobby for over a decade. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I made 6 figures last year, and this year is looking even better. Dad nearly choked on his wine. 6 figures? Nikki, why didn't you tell us? That's wonderful news. I could practically see the dollar signs lighting up in his eyes. Here I was, finally getting recognition for my success, and all he could think about was how much more money I could potentially give them. Well, if you're doing so well, Mom said with that familiar, calculating tone, maybe you could help us with that kitchen renovation we've been talking about. The granite countertops we looked at were only $15,000. Only $15,000. I stared at her across the table. This woman who hadn't worked a full-time job in 5 years, casually talking about spending what amounted to 6 months of my after-expenses income on countertops. Mom, I'm not exactly rolling in cash here. Most of that goes to business expenses, taxes, and, well, I gestured vaguely, not wanting to say, supporting you in front of everyone. Business expenses? Dad scoffed. How much could it cost to run a computer? You're young, Nikki. You don't have real responsibilities yet. No mortgage, no family to support, no real bills. No real bills. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. That's the thing about being single, Aunt Linda added, nodding sagely. So much disposable income. I remember those days. Disposable income. The $3,000 that left my account every month. The emergency car repairs I'd covered last spring. The medical bills when Dad threw out his back and decided his insurance wasn't good enough. The vacation to Florida I'd funded so they could reconnect as a couple. You know what your problem is, Nikki? Mom continued, emboldened by the wine and the audience. You're too focused on this career thing. You're wasting your best years on something that isn't even that important. Look at Jessica. She focused on what really matters and now she's got security for life. What really matters? I repeated slowly. Exactly. Marriage, family, real adult responsibilities. Not playing around on computers all day. Playing around on computers. The work that paid for this house. This dinner. This lifestyle. The skills I'd taught myself. The clients I'd built relationships with. The business I'd grown from nothing. All of it dismissed as playing around. You're being useless, honestly, Dad added with a laugh that felt like a slap. All this computer nonsense when you could be settling down and giving us grandchildren. That's what would actually make us proud. Useless. The word hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, my extended family nodded in agreement or looked away uncomfortably. Uncle Pete started to say something, maybe to defend me, but Mom was already moving on, asking Jessica about wedding venues. I sat there in stunned silence, my fork halfway to my mouth, processing what had just happened. My parents, the people I'd been sacrificing everything for since I was 13 years old, had just called me useless in front of our entire family. Useless. The daughter who paid their mortgage. Useless. The girl who'd given up her own dreams to fund theirs. Useless. The woman who'd built a successful business while they criticized it as a hobby. I set down my fork and reached for my purse. "Where are you going, honey?" Mom asked absently, still discussing flower arrangements with Jessica. "Home," I said, standing up. "Thanks for dinner." I walked out of that house, the house I'd been paying for, and didn't look back. In my car, I sat in their driveway for a long moment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Useless. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up for them. Useless. That night, I canceled the automatic transfer. The first call came 3 days later while I was in a client meeting at a coffee shop in Wicker Park. I watched my phone buzz insistently on the table as I walked my client through their new website mock-up, my parents' names flashing on the screen like an emergency alert. I declined the call and kept talking about brand consistency and user experience. But my stomach was churning. I knew what this was about. They'd noticed the missing transfer. By the time I got home that evening, I had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. I sat on my air mattress with a cup of instant coffee. The good stuff was a luxury I couldn't afford, and played them back one by one. The first few were Dad's voice, confused and concerned. "Nikki, honey, there seems to be some kind of banking error. The money didn't come through this month. Can you give us a call?" Then Mom's voice, more urgent. "Nick, we need you to call us immediately. There's been some mistake with the bank transfer. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow." By the 8th voicemail, Dad's confusion had turned to panic. "Nikki, this isn't funny. We need that money. Your mother's beside herself. Call us right now." And the final few were just Mom crying into the phone, begging me to call back, saying they didn't understand what was happening. I set my phone aside and stared at my apartment walls. For the first time in years, I'd actually looked at my bank balance without immediately calculating what I owed my parents. Without that automatic transfer, I had almost $4,000 in my checking account. $4,000 that was actually mine. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Nikki!" Mom's voice was sharp with relief and anger. "Where have you been? We've been calling you for hours." "I was working, Mom. I had client meetings." "Working, right? Listen, there's been some kind of mistake with the bank transfer. The money didn't come through and we need it immediately. Your father's already gotten 2 calls from the mortgage company." I took a deep breath. "It wasn't a mistake, Mom. I canceled the automatic transfer." Silence. Then, "What do you mean you canceled it?" "I mean, I'm not sending you money anymore." The explosion was immediate. "Are you insane? Nikki, we depend on that money. The mortgage is due. The car payments. How could you do this to us? How could I do this to you?" The words came out louder than I intended. "Mom, I've been supporting you since I was 13 years old. 13! Do you have any idea what that's been like for me? Supporting us? Honey, we're family. This is what families do for each other." "No, Mom. This is what I do for you. When's the last time you supported me? When's the last time you asked how I was doing, or if I needed anything, or if I was okay?" Dad's voice came on the line. She'd put me on speaker. "Nikki, you're being dramatic. We've always appreciated everything you do." Appreciated? 3 days ago, you called me useless in front of the entire family. "We didn't mean it like that," Mom said quickly. "We were just concerned about your future, about you settling down, while sitting in a house I pay for, eating food I bought, talking about a vacation I funded." "Nikki, calm down. You're being hysterical." Hysterical. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you want to know what hysterical is? Hysterical is working 30 hours a week in high school so you could pay your bills. Hysterical is taking out student loans I didn't need so I could give you the money instead. Hysterical is sleeping on an air mattress for 8 months because every time I save enough for a real bed, you have some emergency I need to cover." "We never asked you to live like that," Dad said defensively. "You never asked because you never bothered to find out how I live. When's the last time either of you came to my apartment? When's the last time you asked about my business beyond whether I could afford to give you more money?" The silence stretched on. I could hear them breathing, could picture them in their comfortable living room, surrounded by furniture and decorations I'd helped pay for. "Nikki," Mom finally said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. "We're your parents. Everything we have, we've shared with you. This house will be yours someday. This house will be yours someday, after I spend the next 20 years paying for it. Mom, I've already given you more money than that house is worth. I've been paying for your lifestyle since I was a child. We didn't force you to do anything, Dad snapped. You offered to help when we were struggling. I was 13. I offered to help with one electric bill, and somehow that turned into funding your entire existence. Don't be so dramatic. We've had hard times too. Hard times? Dad, you turned down 3 job offers in the last 2 years because they weren't prestigious enough. Mom, you quit working full-time because you wanted flexibility. You've been living off your daughter's income while calling her career a hobby. I was standing now, pacing the small space of my apartment, 12 years of frustration pouring out of me. You want to know what's really crazy? I continued. I make 6 figures and I live like I'm in college. I eat ramen noodles while you go wine tasting in Napa. I sleep on an air mattress while you shop for $15,000 kitchen renovations. And then you have the nerve to call me useless? We never said you were useless, Mom protested. 3 days ago, Dad, in front of Uncle Pete, Aunt Linda, and the cousins. You said I was being useless, focusing on my career instead of real responsibilities. My career, Mom. The one that's been supporting your real responsibilities for over a decade. More silence. I could hear Mom crying softly in the background. So what are you saying? Dad asked finally. You're just going to abandon us? Leave us with nothing? I'm saying I'm going to start living my own life. You're both capable of working. You're both healthy. You can support yourselves. Nikki, please. Mom's voice was small now. We can't afford the mortgage without your help. We'll lose the house. For a moment, I felt that familiar tug of guilt, the same feeling that had kept me trapped for so many years. But then I remembered sitting in that dining room being called useless while surrounded by the life I'd made possible for them. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you called your financial support system useless at a family dinner. I hung up the phone and turned it off. For the first time in 12 years, I went to bed without worrying about my parents' bills. But I barely slept at all. 2 weeks passed in an eerie silence. No calls, no texts, no guilt-inducing voicemails. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't constantly buzzing with financial emergencies or casual requests for money. The quiet should have been peaceful, but instead it felt like the calm before a storm. I used the time to actually live like someone who made 6 figures. I bought a real bed, a queen-size mattress with a proper frame that didn't deflate in the middle of the night. I stocked my refrigerator with actual food instead of surviving on ramen and whatever was on sale. I even bought myself a winter coat that didn't come from a thrift store. The strangest part was looking at my bank balance and seeing it grow instead of disappear. For 2 weeks, I watched my savings account climb higher than it had been since I was in college. I started researching apartments in better neighborhoods, maybe even a 1-bedroom with actual heat and soundproofing, but the guilt was eating me alive. Every commercial for mortgage companies made my stomach clench. Every time I passed a BMW like my parents' car, I wondered if they'd lost it yet. I found myself checking real estate websites to see if their house had gone into foreclosure, my heart racing every time I searched their address. The rational part of my brain knew I'd done the right thing. The emotional part whispered that I was abandoning the people who raised me. Then came the Facebook post. I was working late on a Friday night designing a website for a local bakery when my phone buzzed with a notification. Mom had tagged me in a post, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. The post was a long, rambling story about how heartbroken she and Dad were that their only daughter had decided to turn her back on family during their time of greatest need. She wrote about how they'd always supported my dreams, even when they didn't understand them, and how they'd sacrificed so much to give me opportunities. She made it sound like I'd been living rent-free in their basement while they struggled to support my frivolous lifestyle. She painted herself as a heartbroken mother who just wanted the best for her ungrateful daughter. The comments were brutal. Family friends, distant relatives, even some of my old high school classmates chimed in with messages of support for my poor, abandoned parents. I was called selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. One comment suggested I was having a quarter-life crisis and would come to my senses soon. Not a single person asked for my side of the story. I stared at the post for an hour, my hands shaking as I read comment after comment condemning me for abandoning my family. The worst part was that some of it came from people who'd been at that dinner 2 weeks ago. People who'd witnessed me being called useless but were now treating my parents like victims. I started typing a response a dozen times, trying to explain the real situation, but every draft sounded defensive or bitter. How could I explain 12 years of financial dependency without looking like I was keeping score? How could I tell people that their beloved neighbors had been living off their daughter's income since she was 13? Instead, I closed Facebook and tried to focus on work, but the damage was done. My phone started buzzing with texts from relatives, all variations of the same theme. How could you do this to your parents? And, family comes first, Nikki. The next morning brought worse news. Uncle Pete called, the first family member to actually speak to me directly since the dinner. Nikki, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, he said carefully. Your parents are saying you've cut them off financially, and frankly, it doesn't sound like you. It's not a misunderstanding, Uncle Pete. I've been supporting them since I was 13. I finally decided to stop. 13? Nikki, that can't be right. They've always talked about how proud they are of your independence. I spent 20 minutes explaining the real situation to him, watching his responses grow shorter and more confused. Finally, he sighed heavily. I don't know what to believe anymore. Your parents seem genuinely devastated. Your mom called your Aunt Linda crying for 2 hours yesterday. Of course she did. They've lost their primary source of income. Nikki, that's a harsh way to talk about your parents. Even Uncle Pete, the one person who'd seemed interested in my actual career at the dinner, couldn't see past the narrative my parents had created. To everyone else, I was just a selfish daughter who'd abandoned her loving parents. The real blow came on Monday when I got a call from my biggest client, the family restaurant in Little Italy. Nick, I'm sorry to do this, said Maria, the owner's daughter who managed their marketing. We've decided to go with a different company for our website redesign. My heart sank. This was a $20,000 project I'd been counting on. Can I ask why? Was there something wrong with my proposal? Not exactly, it's just, well, my mother heard some things about your family situation, and she doesn't feel comfortable working with someone who would abandon their parents like that. Family is very important to us. The Chicago Italian community was small and tight-knit. If word had spread there, it would spread everywhere. I could feel my client base crumbling before my eyes. Maria, I think there's been a misunderstanding about my situation. I'm sure there is, but you know how these things go. My mother's mind is made up. I'm really sorry, Nick. Under different circumstances. She hung up, and I sat in my new apartment with my new bed and my stocked refrigerator, watching my professional reputation dissolve because of my parents' social media campaign. By Wednesday, I'd lost 3 more clients. The construction company Uncle Pete had mentioned, they'd decided to go with someone else. A boutique clothing store I'd been working with for 6 months suddenly didn't need my services anymore. Even the bakery whose website I'd been building left me a voicemail saying they were going in a different direction. My parents had weaponized my decision against me, turning my own community against me. They'd spent years telling everyone what a wonderful, successful daughter they had, and now they were telling those same people what an ungrateful, heartless daughter I'd become. The isolation was suffocating. I'd grown up in this community, built my business here, and now I was being treated like a pariah. Every time I went to the grocery store or grabbed coffee, I felt people staring and whispering. Friday night, alone in my apartment with a bottle of wine I'd bought to celebrate my newfound financial freedom, I seriously considered calling my parents and apologizing. It would be so easy to turn the automatic transfer back on, make a public apology on Facebook, and go back to being the good daughter who sacrificed everything for her family. But then I remembered that word, useless. I thought about 13-year-old me, working after school and weekends, watching my friends go to movies and school dances, while I calculated whether we could afford both groceries and the electric bill. I thought about 18-year-old me, taking out unnecessary student loans so I could keep supporting them. I thought about 25-year-old me, sleeping on an air mattress while funding their wine country vacations. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good daughter meant setting myself on fire to keep my parents warm. No, I wasn't going back to that life, even if it meant losing everything else. But God, it hurt more than I'd ever imagined it would. 3 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Milwaukee, 4 hours away from Chicago and the wreckage of my old life. I'd taken a contract with a tech startup here, helping them build their digital presence from the ground up. It was good work, challenging work, and nobody knew anything about my family drama. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my cousin. The first communication I'd had from any family member since Uncle Pete's call. Hey Nick, heard you moved away. Just wanted you to know not everyone believes what your parents are saying. Call me when you're ready. I stared at that message for a long time. It was the first crack in the wall of silence and judgment that had surrounded me since I'd walked away. But I wasn't ready to call anyone yet. I was still figuring out who I was when I wasn't defined by what I could provide for other people. The startup contract was supposed to be temporary, 6 months to get their systems running. But I'd found something here I'd never had in Chicago. Colleagues who valued my work, not my bank account. Sarah, the CEO, was only 2 years older than me, but had already built something incredible. She didn't see my career as a hobby or ask when I planned to settle down. She saw potential. Nick, we've been talking, she said during our Friday meeting, and we'd like to offer you a permanent position. Head of digital strategy, full benefits, equity package. You've transformed our online presence in 3 months. I almost cried right there in the conference room. After months of feeling worthless, someone was offering me something I'd never had. Recognition that wasn't tied to my ability to fund someone else's lifestyle. I'll need to think about it, I said, though my heart was already screaming yes. That evening, I called Jessica back. Nick, oh my God, I'm so glad you called. How are you? Where are you? I'm okay. I'm in Milwaukee, actually, working. Milwaukee? Wow, you really did leave everything behind. Listen, I owe you an apology. We all do. I sat down hard on the couch in my furnished studio apartment. What do you mean? After you left that dinner, I started thinking about what your parents said, about you being useless and focusing on your career instead of real responsibilities. But Nick, you've been working since we were kids. I remember you always having a job when the rest of us were just hanging out. Yeah, well, someone had to pay the bills. That's what I realized. Mom told me some things after that Facebook post your mom made about how you've been supporting your parents financially for years. My stomach clenched. What did she say? She said she always wondered how your parents afforded that house and that lifestyle on your dad's sporadic work. She said your mom once mentioned that you were such a help with expenses, but she never realized it meant you were paying for everything. I was quiet for a long moment. Finally, it started small, just helping with a bill here and there when I was 13, but it became everything. 13, Nick. You were 13 years old. Jessica's voice was thick with emotion. Do you realize how messed up that is? They turned you into their personal ATM when you were still a child. Hearing someone else say it, someone from our family who understood the dynamics, was like a dam breaking. I told her everything. The automatic transfers, the sacrifices, the years of sleeping on air mattresses while funding their vacations, the way they'd dismissed my success while depending on it. I can't believe no one saw what was happening, Jessica said when I finished. All those family dinners, all those years, and they were living off their teenage daughter's income. Everyone thinks I abandoned them. I lost most of my clients because of that Facebook post. Nick, what they did to you is called financial abuse. I looked it up after Mom and I talked. Making a child financially responsible for adult expenses, manipulating someone through guilt and obligation, using community pressure to force compliance, it's textbook abuse, financial abuse. I'd never had a name for it before, but hearing Jessica say those words made something click into place. This wasn't just family dysfunction or generational differences. This was abuse, plain and simple. The crazy part is, I continued, I still feel guilty sometimes. Like maybe I should go back and help them. That's the abuse talking. They trained you to feel responsible for their well-being from the time you were a child. Of course you feel guilty. They've been conditioning you to feel that way for 12 years. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and looked around. It wasn't much. A studio with basic furniture and a view of a parking garage. But it was mine. Completely, entirely mine. No one else's name on the lease. No one else's bills being paid with my income. For the first time in my adult life, I was living within my own means, for my own purposes. I took the job in Milwaukee. 6 months later, I was promoted to Director of Digital Innovation. I moved into a real apartment, a one-bedroom with hardwood floors and a view of Lake Michigan. I started dating again, something I'd barely had time or energy for when every spare moment was consumed with managing my parents' financial crises. The community pressure back home eventually died down. Jessica told me that other family members were starting to ask questions, especially after my parents put their house on the market. The narrative of the ungrateful daughter was harder to maintain when people realized the scope of what I'd been providing. Uncle Pete called me in the spring, 8 months after I'd left Chicago. Nikki, I owe you an apology. Your parents, well, they've had to make some significant lifestyle changes, and it's become clear that you were supporting them more than anyone realized. I tried to tell you that, Uncle Pete. I know, and I'm sorry I didn't listen. Your dad came to me asking for a loan last month, and when I asked about their finances, the whole story came out. I had no idea you'd been carrying them since you were barely a teenager. How are they doing? I asked, surprised that I genuinely wanted to know. They're okay. They sold the house and moved into a smaller place. Your dad finally took a job, not the prestigious position he was holding out for, but honest work. Your mom's working full-time at the salon now. They're adjusting to living within their actual means. Living within their actual means. What a concept. They ask about you sometimes, Uncle Pete continued. I think they're starting to understand what they lost when they pushed you away. I thought about my parents often, but not with the desperate guilt that used to consume me. I hoped they were okay. I hoped they were learning to support themselves, but I didn't feel responsible for their well-being anymore. A year after leaving Chicago, I got a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter forwarded from my old address, my mother's careful cursive on cream-colored stationery. Dear Nick, it began. I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but I needed to write this letter. Your father and I have spent this year learning to live differently, and we've had a lot of time to think about the choices we made. We realize now that we put responsibilities on you that should never have been yours to carry. We turned our daughter into our financial support system instead of supporting your dreams the way parents should. We called your success useless while depending on it for our survival. We were wrong, and we're sorry. The letter went on for 3 pages, acknowledging specific incidents, apologizing for the Facebook post and the community campaign against me, and expressing pride in what I'd accomplished despite their interference. We don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. We don't expect you to come back or to support us again. We just wanted you to know that we understand now what we did to you, and we're sorry. We love you, and we're proud of the woman you've become. The woman you became despite us, not because of us. I cried reading that letter. Not from guilt or obligation, but from grief for all the years we'd lost. All the relationships that could have been different if they'd seen me as their daughter instead of their income source. I never wrote back, but I kept the letter. 2 years after leaving Chicago, I started my own company. 3 years after that, it was featured in Forbes as one of the fastest-growing digital marketing firms in the Midwest. I was 30 years old, financially stable, and for the first time in my life, living entirely for myself. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting off my parents, if I wish I'd found a way to maintain the relationship while setting boundaries. The honest answer is that I don't know if that was possible. When someone has been financially abusing you since childhood, when they've trained you to believe that love equals sacrifice and that your worth is measured by what you provide, sometimes the only way to break free is to break completely. I learned that I'm not responsible for other people's financial security, even if those people are my parents. I learned that supporting someone shouldn't require sacrificing yourself. I learned that being called useless by people who depend on you says everything about them and nothing about you. Most importantly, I learned my own worth, not as a provider or a financial safety net, but as a person deserving of respect, recognition, and the right to live my own life. I'm not that 13-year-old girl anymore, calculating whether we can afford both groceries and electricity. I'm not the teenager missing school dances to work extra shifts. I'm not the young woman sleeping on an air mattress while funding other people's dreams. I'm Nick, and I'm worth more than what I can provide for others. It took me 12 years to learn that lesson, but now that I have, no one will ever take it away from me again.